Hello and welcome back to Stories Across Borders for a brand new season of nerds raving about fiction. For those of you who are new here, on this podcast we talk about, well, all kinds of different stories across just about every medium you can think of. Books, comics, games, movies, all that good stuff. However, we have one rule. We can only discuss things in terms of the story itself. We can't touch on things like acting, mechanics, art, or animation unless that relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, time traveler, and also your host. And as I so often am, I am joined by my friend and frequent co-conspirator, John Kernan.
Welcome to season 2, everybody. Bigger, better, brasher, louder, and yeah, it's crickets. Crickets are forever. I have lived in the desert. I know your pain.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear them at home, but we can hear them.
Yes, crickets are an unstoppable nuisance.
But yes, did you miss us while we were gone? Did you ever wish perhaps you could turn the clock back, or rather forward to this day, or back to when those first episodes were fresh, so you can enjoy them all over again?
Any
Oh,
chance you've been going through episodes of season 1 just over and over again, back and forth, seeing if there's anything you missed or anything new to learn?
listening to us until you hate us? Probably not. But if you had, this would have been a really good segue into our first theme of the cycle. Time travel. Or rather, the theme for this first cycle. I'm doing well, guys. I'm not out of practice
Everything's
at
great.
all.
It's all fine.
So yeah, time travel. Time travel is one of the oldest concepts to be explored in science fiction as we know it, dating all the way back to the 1700s, actually, believe it or not.
Hmm.
And that,
I wonder what time the guy who went back there came from.
shortly after listening to this podcast, he was inspired.
I'm gonna invent time travel.
That's just modern storytelling, though, actually. Like, fittingly enough, time travel stories have actually been around even longer than that. You can
Yeah.
find stories about some form of time travel back in, like, Hindu and Buddhist mythology, or in, there's this Japanese folktale that I'm about to badly pronounce called Urashima Taro, which is one of the oldest stories of that kind ever. And those are all about, you know, being out of time and coming back and finding yourself in the future, basically. So, humanity has been thinking about traveling through and beyond time for literal ages.
That's true, yeah, and I mean, in a way, you could call a certain connection to time travel also really just from any story where someone's like put into a deep enchanted sleep or a coma or is like locked away and frozen for a long time without having to actively live through all that stuff because what is that but traveling to the future?
Well,
Unwittingly,
that is
perhaps.
actually how a lot of the time travel stories start. Very famous time travel story, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I'm pretty sure actually is that in premise.
H.G. Wells? Oh,
And his wasn't even the first. That was in the mid to late 1800s. 100 or so years before that, there was already modern science fiction stories looking into time travel, which is nuts when you think about it, because it feels like such a modern idea. But then you're like, no, before the internet, before TV, before radio, back when writing was new in a lot of places, maybe not quite that far back, I'm not entirely sure when we first got written script, but in mythology and folk tales even, time travel has existed, because humans are gonna human, and we have a tendency to get stuck in the past and always look forward to the future, often at the expense of the present. How is that for some deep thoughts that you probably weren't expecting to get this early on in an episode?
so deep. Humans have been humans have probably pretty much been thinking about time travel for as long as kids have been going to bed early some nights simply because they're excited for what's going on tomorrow and they want to see it quote unquote faster.
Honestly, yeah. It's just the perception of time is just so tied into the human experience that, like, when you think, like, really, when you think about it, it shouldn't be that surprising. And yet, It is because we see it as such a modern thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that particular thing about people getting like cryogenically frozen and stuff like that, though, because I have like a list here in front of me of the different types loosely of time travel stories. I've tried to break them down into a couple of different types, and the first one on my list is Lost in Time, which is rather than actively traveling through time, a character goes into stasis of some sort and then wakes up in like an unfamiliar future. You get, that's the kind that Urashima Taro is. It's what Interstellar is. It's what Futurama is. It's what Spaceboy is. It's what Captain America is. It's a
Yeah, you're
very
right.
it's what
Futurama is
H.G.
that.
Wells' story, The Time Machine. I think it's been it's a very pervasive thing, but not surprisingly enough, not as a pervasive a form, at least in modern storytelling, as what I'm calling linear time travel, which is wherein a character uses time travel to move forwards or backward through time within the same timeline.
Yeah.
That's your, you change something in the past and it alters the future or vice versa or whatever. That stuff like Predestination, Terminator, Futurama again, at one point, Life is Strange, The Last Day of June, and many others.
Ah, yes, that's right. I wasn't even thinking about it. We're gonna have a reason to talk about Life is Strange again.
Whoa! Because we gave it such a glowing review the first time.
I mean, I still like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I didn't hate it. I just hated Chloe.
Yeah. I don't hate Life is Strange. I hate Chloe. Because Chloe sucks. But she's also at least half supposed to.
True enough. There is also non-linear. Their words. So good at this. Non-linear time travel. Which is where you get a character doing the travel forward or back through time, but it doesn't alter their current timeline. It simply splits it off and spawns a new one. Multiverse.
Trunks.
That's what, your Avengers Endgame until they broke their own rules at the end. That's, for some reason, that's DC's Flashpoint and a lot of stock episodes in various, like, cartoons a lot.
And especially Mr. Future Trunks from Dragon Ball Z.
Oh yeah, that's a whole mess. I never thought of
It's
that.
kind of sad in his case. He explicitly time traveled to change the future, and like, no, sorry, that's not how that works, buddy. Like, he was trying to change. It ended up working out for him, anyways. He got strong enough that he could fix his own world when he got back to it, but he was he was kind of hoping to make some of that stuff not happen to begin with.
Very true. See, already we have so many properties we can possibly go. uh,
Oh yeah.
there's communication, which is a bit of a narrow niche one, right?
So
That's
like
where,
communication across time.
yeah, it's when a character themselves does not necessarily cross through time, but is actively communicating with people in the past or the future to get them to change things there. It's it's often paired with non-linear travel or Lost in Time, I think. Like in Interstellar, I'm not super familiar with that movie, but there's a lot of like back and forth between Earth and the people who are in a different time period, effectively because of being around the black hole. In my favorite webcomic ever, Space Boy, there's a bit of that early on because the protagonist moves to Earth from an asteroid colony. So she's in stasis and ends up staying young, but a friend of hers grows up and has kids of her own and stuff, which is interesting.
Oh, it would be such a different environment, yeah, because asteroids aren't going to have the cycles or the same kind of gravity or like anything. All the forces being exerted on you, both physically and mentally, would be completely different.
Yeah, it's a very niche kind of thing, and I can't think of any examples where it's on its own used, like without any of the other stuff, off the top of my head.
Mm.
Unless you count like the stock episode, you get in like a lot of crime procedural things where people like dig up a time capsule.
Probably some short stories and stuff we just might not have encountered,
Which
but
like
that's
that's
about
that
it.
is adjacent though, to be fair. Like that is, I would say that's communication time travel adjacent. but it doesn't count because there's nothing is actually really moving through time.
True.
Then there is technically the second last, but the quotation marks last time loops, which is a personal favorite of mine, which is where a character repeats the same period of time over and over again, usually to the result of a gradually declining psyche. That's Groundhog Day, Palm Springs, a lot of Japanese media I've realized. For some reason, this particular form of time travel is really, really popular in Japan. When They Cry, ReZero, All You Need Is Kill, which got adapted into that Tom Cruise movie. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Steins Gate, etc., etc., etc. I don't know why that one is so popular over there, but it's huge.
Yeah, it's true. Japan really, really loves the idea of Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day, but sad.
Groundhog Day is, well, yeah, that's true. No, Groundhog Day gets sad. I was about to say it is sad. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of goofy, silly fun in that movie too. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the concept of Groundhog Day, at least,
Horrifying.
is because if anything else, no matter what else positive you try to make out of it, it is a trap. You can't move forward. You can't make progress. And if there's one thing humans are pretty much always hopelessly compelled to do, even if it's in some minor, completely obscure fashion nobody but you would understand, it's make progress.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said earlier on, we rarely think about being in the present as humans. We're always either stuck in the past and remembering what was, or looking forward and wondering what could be. It's very rare that we just exist in the moment. I'm very bad about that. I'm introspective as hell.
That's yeah. I mean, it sometimes so am I. Oh, I almost forgot another really good one. It's not quite loops, so I should have mentioned it a little sooner. But erased.
Oh yeah, that is a good one. That's kind of a weird one. Like it is loops, but it's not loops in the same way as the others.
It's it's like loops and linear time travel at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, no, that checks out. To be fair, I think by default loops are technically usually linear time travel unless explicitly stated otherwise. But
True, but you also aren't really like you aren't properly engaging in linear time travel with loops because part of the thing of loops is that you're not really
changing
changing
anything.
anything because it's
That's
just going to
valid,
happen
yeah.
again.
And
So like,
now that I think about it, actually, a lot of examples I really like explicitly imply or are either imply or are explicitly non-linear. So valid. I have one last category on this list, which just reads in my notes. Also, Arrival exists, which isn't quite any of these, but it feels like it deserves a mention.
oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Because I thought about lumping it in with communication, but it's really not. It's almost more like it's not even quite premonition. It's just that the aliens perceive time in a completely different way.
That's true. It's in a way that's still similar to time travel though, because apparently, at least as far as we can tell so far, even our reality, time itself is much more affected by our perception than you would expect.
Time is
We always
complicated.
think
Like,
we always think of our perception as something that is completely detached from reality and unique to just us, and like time is the one aspect of life where we can look at, and at least as far as we can tell, seems to genuinely be tied to our perception of it.
not exactly. Like, time is very weird because what we think of as time is actually just how we measure time passing. Time itself
Yeah,
is part of the fabric of the universe that is intrinsically woven into everything. To the point, like, time is something that is affected by gravity. That's why the black hole in Interstellar which is scientifically accurate. They consulted a lot of physicists on it. Had the impact it did because time moves differently around areas of higher gravity. You can see it to a very small extent on Earth, right? Where if you have two clocks measuring like atomic clocks even that are down to the most minute plank of time. If one person with one of those matching clocks goes up a mountain and the other one stays at the bottom, when the other one comes back down, the clocks will not be the same.
True. Yeah, and I mean,
Gravity's so
also
bizarre. It's wild.
don't forget don't forget about reality too. Even it's tied into the gravity thing, or sorry, not reality, relativity,
Mm-hmm.
because move fast enough and that dilates time too.
Yeah. The actual physics of time travel is, well, going backwards, realistically, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but the interstellar method of time travel is theoretically possible, which is insane to think about.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever properly master or learn to move through time. I wouldn't be surprised at all if at some point humanity masters certain manipulations of time.
Yeah, if we don't kill all of ourselves before we get there.
Hey, maybe we'll do both at the same time. Be optimistic.
Maybe.
May-
Maybe
Maybe
that'll be
fucking
what
with
kills
time will
us.
be what does it. Yeah. Oh, what did you say that black hole ripped open and it's getting bigger? Oh, that's cool.
That's not how that's supposed to work. Uh-oh. Yeah. So I thought we could break this down by sort of going through and talking about each of the like kinds of time travel and just see where that takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always fun.
So we'll start with Lost in Time, since it was the first on the list, and also where in a lot of ways where the idea of time travel started.
True. Yeah, it's the classic and most simple idea because it's something that at least in small ways has been happening to people since way before we had any understanding of what it actually was or what caused it.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways the most realistic, right? Like you could imagine like cryogenics getting to a point where you can freeze someone. But also people have experienced similar things in reality. There's like things you can draw from
Comas.
being incarcerated for a long time, comas, that sort of thing. Things that effectively remove you from society.
Yeah,
And then
it's the
you
form of time travel that in some small way really actually exists naturally.
it's also by nature, unless I mean communication a little bit I guess, but really it's also the only one by nature that is inescapable.
True. Because you are not manipulating time. You are simply it is simply your perception of it that is being adjusted, and by the time you're back to perceiving time in reality normally, that's it. That's all she wrote. You don't have any power over time or ability to move through it, so you are where you are.
Yeah, it's not, you are not moving through time. Time is moving without you.
Which, oh, what a fun thought.
And I mean, it plays into that idea of stasis as well, right? Where the idea of being stuck, not being able to progress or grow or change, is kind of terrifying to us or distressing. Like,
Yeah,
I know that from my own personal experience with my illness, basically, that for a very long time I felt very similar to this, where everything was moving on without me and I could do nothing, and it's not fun.
yeah. I've in smaller ways, but I've been there too, here or there. There's few things in life that are more frustrating than feel like you're spinning your wheels in a pit of mud.
Yeah, I mean, it's that feeling, right, when you open up social media and you see, oh, look at all my friends who have just gotten this promotion or bought a house or gotten married or are up to their like third or fourth kid, and you're still, in your perception anyway, so far behind. Like everyone has experienced something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling is definitely at the root of this like subgenre of time travel in a lot of ways. You emerge into this new unfamiliar world and everything has left you behind.
It all changed without you, and it turned out not having you as a part of the world did absolutely nothing.
Uh,
Everybody and everything just moved on without you.
yeah, it's one of the most existential forms of time travel story, maybe of storytelling in general, because it makes you question if you matter. Are you
Yeah,
having an impact on the world or those around you in any way? Which is holy shit, really, when you think about it, right?
I love when stories do a good job answering that question. Heck, I mean, it's slight side tangent for just a second because it's not time travel, but one of the big hooks early on in one of my favorite anime, Yu Yu Hakusho, is that feeling, that moment of seeing what kind of impact you have on the people around you when Yusuke watches his own funeral and sees a bunch of people he thought didn't give a crap about him not only there but really upset that he's gone.
Yeah, it's
Stuff like that.
exactly. It's exactly that sort of thing. I talked a little bit about Space Boy, which I know you're not familiar with. We'll have to change that one day. Uh,
Absolutely. Sounds good.
it toward the end, this is less of a plot point, but early on, the main character Amy, who you will note is not a boy, that's a whole other thing. Uh, the actual title character is someone different.
Whoa.
It's yeah, it's interesting. It's always funny when well, funny not like haha, but unique and interesting when a story does that and tells like a story that's largely someone else's through the perspective of a different narrator.
I love
Not
stories like that.
yeah, not that Amy's not important. She's a very important character to it all, but yeah,
No, yeah, I love it when your POV character is not necessarily maybe you could still call them the protagonist, but they don't really feel like they are, and even if they are, what they're not is the driving force of the plot.
exactly. It's always very interesting. And this story does it very well. But early on, especially, is we get a lot of this fish out of water. Amy having to like adjust to a world that is quite different, and I guess it's leaned into communication as well, though, because we get a pretty positive ending to this one, right? Because she at one point communicates because of course, like I said earlier, this one dips into that. And she calls her friend across space. You get this really poignant moment where she calls her friend, and she this girl who looks just like her answers the call, and it's not her friend; it's her friend's kid, and she just has to like process this. But then she still does get to reconnect with her friend, and her friend becomes her anchor for a while in this new world and gives her a lot of encouragement. It's very nice to see.
Aw,
Weirdly enough, I think one of the stories that actually does this crazy well though is Futurama.
Futurama does it surprisingly well. It's easy to feel like the concept gets left behind by the fact that it's mostly just how the show starts, but it's really not. And then also Futurama has actual time travel.
Which we'll probably touch on that again as well. But Fry's whole thing in that is basically that he feels completely useless and irrelevant where he is.
Yeah,
He
because the world
accidentally
didn't just
Nibbler gets frozen cryogenically, wakes up 1,000 years in the future in sci-fi land, finds out he still doesn't matter and everything has gone on without him.
he in fact he matters less than he ever did. And he luckily Fry is better at dealing with that feeling than most people, and if anything, at the very least, he tries harder to matter and to make his life happen in this new future than he did in his original time, which actually does lead to him making a bigger impact, having a better life, having people around him, and all that.
Yeah, it's hard.
But
It's easy to miss it that he does, in fact, make an opportunity out of the situation. But he does, like, use the clean slate to build something new for himself.
yeah, and he finds his great 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 grandson. I probably missed a couple greats there.
Probably. Uh,
Probably like 300 years worth of greats or something.
what's interesting though about it, right, is that at a couple of points, Futurama does go back to show you that he did matter to some people.
And some creatures.
Oh yeah, we're getting to that. We're going to talk about his brother first. Uh,
Ah, Yancey.
I don't remember a lot about this, but to be fair, but basically, we learn that you're more familiar with these, but you might better correct me. But there was the thing with the clover.
Yeah, it's one of the big stories they do that I think actually ties in really strongly. Uh, the episode mostly makes it about Fry's jealousy of his brother because his brother was always better at everything, more popular, got more attention and love from his parents, and um, when they were really little was a little bit of a bully, but after that, what pissed Fry off even more was he felt like the bad guy on top of all that because not only did Yancey seem to be better at everything and have everything better, but he was nice and humble about it eventually. Like, and so they make it seem like it's a lot more about that, but it also does come into that feeling of um if you matter and changing things and all that because Yancey Fry does has his lucky little charm. Is what was it, a 6-leaf clover, something crazy like that?
Something like that, yeah.
It was his genuine good luck charm. Everything seemed to work out for him when he had it, and Yancey always wanted it. And sure enough, Fry didn't bring that clover to the future with him. And Yancey keeps it back in the past, and we get to see, despite all of Fry's reservations, that not only did Yancey love his brother, but he really, really respected and cared about him, and also, like, kind of in a way gave him credit for the clover. He didn't see the clover as his good luck charm. He saw the clover as something from his brother that gave him good luck. And he continues to move forward in the future. He does find success. He becomes an astronaut. He does these great things, gets a damn statue. Or well, he does all these great things, and then what is it? I think he names his kid after Fry
And gives him the clover, yeah.
and gives him the clover, and his kid goes on to outshine both of them. And sadly enough, because Fry didn't get to see any of that, an audience did, the first thing he can think when he sees that statue is, oh, well, on top of everything else, he took my name too.
Which is, that's rough.
It's so sad.
And that's not even the harshest it gets, because now we're going to talk about a dog.
Oh, yeah, we all love talking about dogs. Dogs are never sad, right?
No, no, never.
I'm already hearing the song in my head.
So, in the past, Fry adopts a dog off the streets, basically. It's
Cute, scruffy, dirty little thing.
his best friend in the world. Kind of the only one that the only one that Fry feels like cares about him, basically.
Yeah,
They are not together when Fry gets frozen,
yeah.
and
He leaves
every
him behind.
every day until that dog dies, it just sits at the front of the pizzeria where Fry used to work, waiting for him to come back. Which is
Every single day.
heart-wrenching for a silly fucking comedy story written by the Simpsons guy.
Yeah, yeah. That episode goes hard. Watching that dog go back to the same spot every day, just thinking about his best friend and just laying there for however long it takes until he's old and gray and he's almost got nothing left. And then in the future, we get our one little ray of hope when they find Fry's dog preserved in, I think, what, like carbon and obsidian.
I'm not sure.
I think it was related to a volcano, something that requires immense heat and pressure. But thanks to the future tech, it seems like there might be a way for them to try to get the dog back, and things don't work out that way. Sometimes what's gone is gone, even if you didn't get to say goodbye, and nothing can change that.
It's such a poignant episode, right? Because it simultaneously has two almost contradictory, not really, but they feel oppositional, I guess,
Yeah.
messages that are both equally true and equally important. The first is it re-emphasizes that time waits for no one. It moves on without whether you like it or not, with you or without you. People drift apart, they die, nothing lasts forever. Which, holy shit, Futurama. But it also goes to show you that, yeah, you matter.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter how
everything.
small or insignificant you feel or seem, you have an impact on the people around you, which is a way happier message to take from that.
Every contact, every deed, good or bad, everything has, if nothing else, at the very least, little echoes, little ripples, and whether you can see it or not, there's somebody you've affected. There's somebody whose life would be different with you gone. And for the most part, probably somebody whose life would be lesser without you in it, because that's just kind of how humans are. We're social creatures. The connections we make, the people we meet, we matter, and everything is going to affect something, even if it's a small enough ripple that nobody else can feel it. We look back and we see situations like the thing with Fry and Yancey and his poor sweet dog, and see that even this person who, as far as he could tell, had nothing in life, had people, an animal, just things he left behind. And although time marches on, and they did go on without him, it wasn't for nothing. And them going on specifically without him did change things.
Yeah, Urashi and Mitara are the story that I've mentioned that sort of started a lot of that, at least as far as folktale stuff goes. Is very similar, I suppose, in a lot of ways, because it's a dude who goes off to like the divine or whatever, comes back and finds that time has moved on without him. Things in the land of the divine go different, like flow differently, and everyone he knew is just dead and gone, and there's no evidence he was ever there. It's horrible and heartbreaking. That's so that goes back to the sort of sad side, I guess. And that's the thing, like, looking at this, looking at all what we've just talked about, right? From the small things to the depressing things to the surprisingly positive things. And that's without even getting to the insanity that is Interstellar or any of that. I feel like the Lost in Time version of time travel is kind of overlooked compared to the other stuff because it's not as flashy. But in reality, it's not just an excuse to tell a funny fish out of water story. It is a very useful tool for telling, like raising some interesting philosophical questions.
Yeah, and even if it makes it seem a little less fantastical, it is, out of all of them,
The most
the variety that's the most grounded in reality, and that gives it a lot of play and a lot of power, because most of how we're affected from stories, however fantastical and silly they may be, always comes back to, in some way, a relation to reality, a message that's just as relevant in the real world, or a theme, or some sort of something that resonates with real people who are going through the real things.
Yeah. Okay, linear time travel.
Ah, yay. So, yeah.
Let's
Hey
step
man,
away from the
I
existential dread for a minute ish.
I bet if you knew exactly where he was going to be on the right day, it would be pretty easy to find Hitler alone and vulnerable in a room.
Okay, let's get that one out of the way first. The Kill Hitler story is overdone and it's lazy. Moving along.
There you go. We did it.
Yeah, you could tell some good stories with it. Tell a different one.
Tell one I haven't heard before, or at least one I've only heard a couple of times.
What if the Nazis won? Same boat.
I've got bad news for you if you want to tell that story. Wolfenstein exists.
uh,
Too late.
yeah, linear time travel again is the one where there is a singular timeline and the actions you take if you move back in it will influence the future to change the future. It is a form of this sort of this genre, the time travel sci-fi genre, where it is all about consequences for the most part. We can touch again on Futurama real quick, because it does this too, where
And it does it well.
it does it well, gross but well, in a sort of parody of Back to the Future, where where basically Fry goes back to the past, sleeps with his grandmother unknowingly, becomes his own grandfather, which starts everything because the fact that that grandfather paradox happened leaves him without the like, what is it, the alpha brainwave or something,
Yeah.
which makes him the pretty much the only one capable of dealing with these evil brain in a ball guys in the year 3000 and something.
All thanks to some guy spending a night with his grandma.
Yeah.
And as Fry says, well, I did do the nasty and the pasty.
Because of that, a different character time travels to the past and makes sure he gets cryogenically frozen so he's there in the future when he needs to be. Thanks, Nibbler. So that's how that happens in Futurama. That's basically the entire premise of Terminator before they start screwing everything up in the later movies.
Ah, yes. Terminator. The one
Go
of the
back.
most famous examples of time travel, which I have, if at first, some really good things to say, and then I don't want to look at it anymore.
I mean, most people are at least passingly familiar with how that works. The Terminator is sent back to kill John Connor before he can stop Skynetting, and someone else has to go back to protect him. And then in the second one, surprise, the Terminator is not the bad guy in that one.
Yes, because it turns out,
And then they never made another movie.
yeah, because it turns out Terminator is a more specific kind of linear timeline we haven't actually covered yet, and that is the absolute timeline. The timeline where everything was always going to happen the way it happened, and what happens happens, and even if you time travel, turns out you didn't change anything. Things happened the way they happened, including your time travel shenanigans and what you tried to do to change things.
Yep. A sort of
It was all a part of it.
Because sometimes time travel, especially linear time travel, does get into this idea of what is predestined.
Hey, you know that thing you went back in the past and did? That's actually part of why the future you originally came from happened.
Yeah, the philosophical question of linear time travel, other than, actions have consequences, the other one it deals with a lot is, does choice matter?
Yeah.
But is everything set in stone to play out a way, or is everything in free fall and who knows what the hell will happen? Terminator deals with that. You wouldn't think it does, but it does.
Yeah, and the funny thing about how Terminator deals with it is it's not human error. It's a machine that makes that mistake. Like the the whole point of Terminator is Skynet is trying to do time travel shenanigans and make the future happen the way it wants by stopping its greatest enemy from ever being born. And and in the end, it creates its own worst enemy because spoiler alert for a really old, really famous movie you should have seen by now if you care. John Connor's father is his best friend Kyle Reese, who travels back in time to save him from the Terminator.
Yeah.
If the Terminator hadn't been there, Kyle Reese wouldn't have been there to meet his mom and make him.
Do the nasty and the basty.
He did the nasty and the pasty.
And it's these recurring themes all the way through linear time travel stories of some things are just going to happen, but also actions have consequences. It's very funny that two completely oppositional themes are the ones that are present in almost every linear time
Yeah,
travel story to varying extents.
simultaneously the idea of you and what you do matters. You don't get to just go through life and have nothing and have no consequences. But also, calm down. You're not a god. You can't just play with things however you want and manipulate them.
Oh yeah, it's time travel stories are weird like that. Where there's a reason they're notoriously hard to do, because
It's a very fickle subject matter. I know it might be weird to call a subject matter fickle, but it is.
it's complicated and full of contradictory themes that somehow have to go together, and also timelines that you need to and paradoxes that you need to figure out. And linear time travel is the worst one for that.
It sure is. Linear time travel is the one that turns its own authors into that guy holding a bunch of scraps of paper screaming, make it make sense.
You have done that to yourself. Yeah. So another really good example that of the blending of those themes we've already mentioned already this episode is Life is Strange. Actually does this really well, despite the fact I was ragging on it a bit earlier because fucking Chloe. Because it is a linear time travel story where the choices Max, the time traveler, makes have a dramatic impact on things, right down to the very first choice she made, where she saved Chloe from the consequences of Chloe's actions.
Yep. And by virtue of being the only one with this ability, the only one who's moving through time, that means the onus, the moral weight, and the conundrums when she sees what her decisions do is all on her. Because by the time she's done that, the choices are laid out in front of her, and she just all she can do is pick because the only other things she could possibly do are exponentially less stable, and she could never in a million years possibly even come close to predicting what any other choices she'd make will do. So she's more or less forced to make a binary decision between two vastly different branching outcomes she's already seen.
Honestly, yeah, I think more than just about it, and I can't believe I'm giving this much praise to Life is Strange, but more than just about any other story we may talk about during the time travel cycle, I think Life is Strange deals a lot with the responsibility of having that power and the moral dilemma of should you use it. Because Max is presented with some horrible choices to make throughout the Life is Strange, right down to the very first one of, do I save Chloe's life with this power? They are not easy choices to make, but those choices have consequences. And the thing is, the universe, and this is where the set in stone destiny side of things comes into play. The universe is programmed, basically. It almost feels like it is determined to make sure that things play out the way they are supposed to play out.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it quite acts 100% fatalistic, like everything is supposed to happen a certain way, but what it does feel almost like
Certain things are.
is it feels like certain things are supposed to happen, and also more than that, it feels like Max's time traveling ability is an anomaly. She doesn't her ability is not in the plan for the universe, or it's not natural. It is not a part just a part of the world that's happening, at least not as the structure of the world itself understands it.
Yeah, even as most of the plot of Life is Strange centers around Max using her powers to like solve these murders and kidnappings going on, there is this whole other plot happening in the background that is honestly more important, which is this notion of the things Max is doing are altering the timeline, so the world is being pushed, like the fabric of the universe is being pushed to do more and more extreme things to set things right to where they're supposed to be, to the point that this massive fucking tornado is going to appear toward the end, because the only way to put the timeline where it is supposed to be is for Chloe to die, and the universe will wipe out an entire town to make that happen.
Because unfortunately, not just not just does it seem like Chloe was supposed to die, she, much like all the greatest quote unquote victims of fate, always ends up doing something stupid or bad, and or even just running into something bad and dying, not simply because of fate, but it is a fate that exists because of who she is. It's not even necessarily that she's fated to die, but Chloe is someone who will always get herself killed. That's the person she's become. She's that self-destructive and reckless and sometimes stupid. She, like, if she is not babysat and kept alive at all costs, she's gonna find a way to get herself killed, which means by some twisted logic, she is supposed to die. It's just going to happen. And Max is preventing that. And that's unnatural.
Yeah. The last day of June, spoilers for a very good game for those ahead for those who don't aren't familiar. It does something very similar, where this grieving widower gains the ability to use his wife's paintings to travel back through time. And it's sort of like a
Oh,
puzzle game where you can interact with different people in the town and rearrange things in the town and change different events in an effort to save her life,
oh.
because there's a car crash. And we keep seeing that the more that he changes, the more things stay the same. That crash happens one way or another over and over and over again until eventually he realizes two heartbreaking things, basically. One, this is not the first time this has played out. In the past, his wife went through the exact same experience
Oof.
to keep him alive, not realizing that it would end badly for her because, surprise, she was pregnant. Uh,
A life is going to be
her
taken.
life is going to end. That crash is going to happen. So in the end, he makes the decision to switch seats with her. Uh, and he dies, but his wife and his unborn child live, and it's heavy. And this
His
is it.
only options are go through that pain and loss,
There is no
or
real.
sacrifice himself and make his wife go through that pain and loss.
Exactly. Again, it's those contradictory but somehow meshing perfectly themes of some things are just going to happen, and your actions have consequences.
Yeah, one thing that never escapes importance in time travel stories is acceptance. No matter how much you want to, or even if it seems like you can change things, you also have to be able to accept things for what they are.
Time travel can get surprisingly heavy. Like that game has no real voice acting. There is no spoken lines. Everything is just like vague intonations that give you a idea of what kind of mood or discussion is going on. Except there is this one thing, which is there is like a memory almost of the wife screaming in just despair and pain that is so raw and real compared to all the other like quotation marks voice acting. I mean, it is voice acting, but it's not like dialogue that happens in the
Yeah,
game that is like holy shit. Yeah,
yeah, that's. Oh,
That's that's linear time travel. Non-linear time travel. Also, no, we could also call it the cop-out kind of time travel.
time travel with so much potential for some pretty amazing things, but also, unfortunately, a lot of potential for cowardice.
Yeah, where linear time travel is all about actions have consequences, non-linear time travel exists to tell the time travel story without consequences, largely. It allows a writer to tell a story about like changing time or whatever without actually screwing up their existing timeline. The main gist of these stories is usually learning to accept the things that happen in your existing timeline because things could be even worse in a different one.
Yeah, I'm sure when that type of story originally came about, it was not originally conceived of as a cop out or a way to escape culpability. I'm sure the first people who wrote stories like that probably did it just more specifically thinking, man, what if all the like because a part of it comes down at least like a little bit to the more basic idea of quantum mechanics, right? What if all the different choices you could make and all the different consequences therein all happened and all existed at once?
Yeah,
You just separate from each other. You can't just and that's where most of the fun positive potential of multiverse, multi-timeline stories comes from is looking at something and being like and having the ability to see those different mutually exclusive events and consequences and stuff play out. It's just unfortunately being such a big and such a flexible playground, it also leaves not just a lot of room for mistakes, but a lot of room for authors to run away from their mistakes and have their characters and stories run away from their mistakes.
yeah. Like there are loads of these stories. Avengers Endgame, until they broke their own rules at the end for some reason, is a good example of this. DC's Flashpoint story is a really good example of this, where the Flash goes so fast he can break through time and go to an alternate timeline and basically uses that to save, I think it's his mother's life, because he's a superhero, of
Yeah.
course he's got dead parents. And that spirals out of control, and that timeline is so much worse for that one thing. It's
Yeah,
one
in that timeline, Batman has 5 o'clock shadow. He doesn't even shave.
it's one it's one of those stories which is basically accept the bad things that happened because it could have been
They're what
so
made you
much
who
worse.
you
Yeah,
are.
it's what made you who you are, exactly. There's a
But
lot.
also, yeah, you're right. It could have been so much worse.
Yeah,
And, like, also, you're not God. How do you know you go back and try to fix things? You're going to make them better.
yeah, that's another sort of thing that plays into it very much. A lot of stock episodes use nonlinear time travel. A lot of the you see that a lot of cartoons do this one. The What If I Was Never Born. A lot of what if kind of storylines. God, what's the story called? I just had a mental blank. The one with Scrooge.
Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol is kind of this. It's you can tell some really good stories with nonlinear time travel. I have no
Yeah.
complaints about its existence, and in fact, if you had told me you wanted to write a time travel story, I would recommend doing a nonlinear time travel story because it's the only one, really, where you can do whatever you want without screwing your original timeline. It is
Yeah.
There is a good reason to do this, and you can definitely tell some very poignant stories or engaging stories.
Spoiler alert. The version of time travel that has all the flexibility is also what gives you flexibility.
Who would have thought? It's just important to remember that this is also the form of time travel story where the consequences feel like they matter the least. You need to make these stories very character centric because there are no real consequences in a series of infinite timelines like this.
And narrative weight is very closely tied in with weight of actions, a weight of consequences. The less of
Absolutely.
that you have, the harder it is to have your narrative weight, which lends to these stories being best, as he says, as character focused. Because no matter what's going on with the world, you can always have consequences for your characters. Put your characters through things. Make them suffer. Don't worry, it'll be fine. It's fun. Hurt them.
Yeah.
Hurt your babies.
That's exactly the best non-linear time travel stories are the ones that put the character through the ringer and center around their personal growth and lessons learned.
Yeah. Just
There are other
be
ways
like
to do it.
us.
To be fair, like
Hurt your
choosing which
children.
timeline gets to live or die, that sort of thing is also an option, but uh, it's not like the main like common type of thing done with the storytelling.
You know what you don't see that often, but is always for me a slightly fun interpretation of this kind of stuff is when somebody isn't explicitly trying. Somebody maybe even doesn't conventionally time travel. They're not even explicitly trying to do something that changes time or changes the future, but they do it anyways. And we are just blindsided with some sort of big consequence that can't be undone and isn't going to go back to the way it was. Not even necessarily through something like character death, but for instance, stories I've seen where suddenly, hey, the whole main friend group never met and hasn't been through all their cool, deep moments that grew them as people and fostered their relationships. And only the main character knows and remembers. And I'm sorry, but these people, they're not your friends. They don't care what you're talking about. They don't know you. You're not special to them.
Yeah,
You have to deal with that.
you've got to be careful with that kind of story because it can often feel like a hard reset out of nowhere that can make the audience
Yes.
not super thrilled. But if you do it well and execute it well, it can be heartbreaking. And making the audience feel anything is the goal, even if that feeling is sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's rough.
but it also there's always the chance there to rebuild those friendships. So it's not like it's a you can't salvage a situation. You know these people, even if it's not the version of this person. Like you know their likes and dislikes and things like that, and their experiences up to a certain point to a degree. So you can
They are who
rebuild the
they are.
friendships. But there's always going to be the question of is this the same person?
Yeah.
Communication, I don't have a lot to say about as a method because it is almost always paired with another kind of time travel story. It's usually it's less of a subgenre or anything, and more of just a plot device. I really don't have a lot to say about it. It can be amazing,
Yeah.
like it's the entire emotional crux of Interstellar is the communication between the past and the future. But like I don't have a lot to say about it narratively, other than it is a useful plot device for either allowing a character closure or creating tension through a sense of distance.
Yeah, because unfortunately, for the most part, that's all it can be. It can only be a plot device. It can't be the plot.
I mean, it could.
It can, but that has to be your explicit goal from the very beginning, and you have to put in the legwork
Yeah,
to shape the story completely around it. Like there are types of stories that lend themselves to being foundations, and there are types of stories you have to decide you are going to use as a part to build the foundation. And the communication time travel is one of those. It doesn't get to just be foundational. You have to put the work in to make it foundational and build that foundation up once you start.
yeah. I think the way to do like off the top of my head, the way I would do a story where I wanted communication between time to be the entire crux of the narrative would be to make it a linear story as well, and basically, oh, would it be a linear story? I don't know. I don't want to get into that. I have to think about that. But basically, your future version is sending you information on what actions
Yeah.
to take to improve your life in the future.
Come to think of that,
I'm sure it's been. I'm certain it's been done before. I feel like I've even seen this movie, but
There's only one example I can think of off the top of my head, and it's not actually a movie. It's a video game. Spider-Man: A Crack in Time has Peter Parker in the year, I don't know, fucking 2014 or whatever, and Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. Neither one is able to travel to the other's time, other than like it happens like once early on for a couple seconds. You know, Miguel saves Peter, but other than that, Peter Parker is going through his time in the quote unquote present, and Miguel O'Hara is going through 2099, and they're connected and actively communicating as they go through to do things like Miguel finding an obstacle he can't get past in the future and telling Peter about it so he can go change it and make it not a thing, only for that to lead to crop up to new consequences that Miguel then has to deal with differently
Yeah,
and stuff
that's
like
good.
that.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's really good. I think saying you can't make it the crux of the story would definitely be disingenuous, but it's definitely not gonna a common choice, and I think it is because it is limited in what you can do with it.
Yeah, it's not a natural fit. You can do it, but you have to make it work.
Which does leave us with whatever the hell Arrival is, which I also don't have a lot to say about that, just because it's not really time travel in a traditional sense. It just feels like it needed to be mentioned in a time travel episode.
Fair.
Because that's more time perception, and it's weird, and yeah, that does leave us with only time loops left, which I don't think we need to say a lot about necessarily that right now. We'll definitely go into a little bit, but I know for a fact that our next episode we are going to go in deep into time loops.
Oh, I'm excited. We love time loops in this house.
Uh, so time loops are the type of story you tell when you want to mentally destroy your protagonist.
Yeah, because
Uh,
few things are harder to deal with than stagnation. And a time loop is the worst kind of stagnation in that it's moving stagnation. Things are happening, but no progress is being made. No great change is happening. And the small changes that are happening usually only serve to cause confusion or suffering or both.
it's also a really it's another it has something in common with Lost in Time, which means it's a really good way it's a really good way to get existential with people and ask the question of, do you matter? Does anything matter anymore? Everything is always going to end the same anyway. What's the point?
What in the end can you do when everything happens the same way? And that's another fun thing too is the actual I didn't think about it earlier, but the direct tie-in to reality Groundhog Day has when people in real life feel like they're going through Groundhog Day, that kind of insane monotony that starts to creep into somebody's head and mess them up when they feel like every single day of their life is exactly the same. Like, even though time is moving forward, you're getting up and living the same day over and over again in reality.
Exactly. It is very much that notion of just not mattering, insignificant. You're just repeating the same thing, making the same mistakes, even when you think you're not. It's time loops are the kind of story that get unless you really want to put the effort in to make them really funny, will just by nature of what they are grind a character's psyche to dust.
That's what they would do to almost any real person.
Exactly. Which is why the goal of a time loop story is usually to escape the loop. Much as though when you
Yeah.
feel like your life is in stasis, you look for progress and change. You do the same in
Yep.
a time loop. You look for what you have to fix or change or do to escape the monotony and the insanity, to be a human again, basically. And
Yeah,
usually
and
this means you have to make a very hard choice or choices of some sort, or achieve something incredibly difficult.
yeah, sometimes you have to make some very hard decisions only to go on with your life, make another mistake, and be in another loop and find out you have to make more hard decisions.
Oh boy. Oh, next week's gonna be a ride.
Exciting.
Yeah. Whilst like Lost in Time stories and non-linear and time stories tend to be about acceptance. Even linear time travel, to an extent, tends to be about acceptance. Time loops are pretty much explicitly about escape.
Yep. It's a trap. Time loops have this funny thing where, unlike every other sort of time travel, it is completely and utterly separate from and usually inconsequential to reality, despite the intense feelings and actions and suffering and all that, because a time loop is just about always one of two things. It's something to escape from, or something someone who hates reality is escaping to. Sometimes it's both at once. Sometimes one person wanting to escape reality and going into something that is essentially a time loop traps other people with them who are forced to suffer forever because of this other person's escape from reality.
Yeah, and the thing is, whilst those stories may then inadvertently be about acceptance for the antagonist, they are never for the protagonist, and I think
No,
that's the distinction. They are because whilst one person may be escaping into a loop, the other one is who is stuck there and aware of it is always going to want to get out of it. Always, because that is
what else could
human
you possibly
nature.
want?
It's human nature
That's
to
how we're
want
built.
progress. Even those of us like me who typically resist change ultimately want things to change and grow. Whether
Yeah,
whether we realize it or not, humans are compelled to progress. We cannot stand stagnancy. Routine,
it is in our
maybe.
nature to walk forward.
Uh,
Routine, sure.
Predictability, absolutely. But stagnancy, we none of us want it. Even if we think we
No,
want it, we don't want it.
no. At best, the closest we ever come to truly wanting something like stagnancy is for your life to be a wheel. It might loop around. There might be the same parts on each end of that circle that you're going to roll back to every day, but the wheel itself has to keep rolling forward.
They're a
Oh,
very special kind of psychological horror, even when they're not horror.
you know, I just realized that that wheel thing works a little better than I thought. Reality is a rolling wheel. A time loop is a hamster wheel.
Yeah. And yeah, the lessons to be taken from a time loop are very often hard to swallow. For some characters, it's that things have to change eventually, whether you like it or not. That's usually the antagonist in a situation where there is one. Others are that you know sometimes it's you've got to work to make a change happen. You can't just wait for it, otherwise you'll get going through. And sometimes it is that you can't change things.
Sometimes it can also be a sort of acceptance for the protagonist. Sometimes it's that you have to just accept how things are and live your life, because until you do, you're not moving forward. You're just as stagnant outside of the loop as you are in it.
Exactly. Like time loops are interesting because despite being stories that explicitly revolve around escape, often the message is acceptance.
Yeah,
Not
not
always.
necessarily acceptance of everything, but there's usually something you have to accept. Something that
It's
hurts
a time
and
loop
is
is
difficult.
explicitly it is always about moving past a point in time by nature of
Yeah,
what it is. So sometimes the message is to escape from that point in time. You have to accept that it happened. It's We're gonna get into this a lot, so we can leave time loops there because next week is gonna be a ride. We've got a 2-for-1 deal on time loops next week.
oh boy, you guys are getting such a bargain. Just you wait. It's gonna be wonderful. If you
Yeah.
think we had a lot to say about this,
Yeah, it's one for the weebs, it's one for the time travel fans. It's a two-for-one deal because we realize these two stories, despite being very different in a lot of ways, are thematically so similar we couldn't break it into two episodes.
Yeah, no, like, hey, and it's a realization we only really came to by experiencing them, each of us experiencing one for the first time at the same time.
Yeah, that is true. I had you watching When They Cry at the same time as you had me watching ReZero just about, and both of us were going, "Oh, this is kind of the same thing, but not."
Yeah, so much overlap. It
Like
was
for such
so
radically
fun.
different stories and and tones, even to an extent. The thematics across them, and the experience of the characters going through it. Oh boy! So get ready for some spoiler heavy, weeb heavy, time travel trauma, time loop heavy insanity for the next one.
I'll go ahead and say it now, even though we're not there yet. Anybody who's interested in ReZero or Higurashi, you've got a week if you want to watch. Neither of them are super long. You could just you go ahead and if you want to delay watching the next episode for like maybe an extra week so you can finish watching them, if you're interested in them, watch them before the episode. They're great, they're wonderful, and you're gonna want that context.
Absolutely are. Until then, though, we are going to go back into the inescapable timeless void that we exist in between episodes. So, on that note,
Yeah,
as always, you can find me on Twitter. And that is what we are calling it, Elon.
X to doubt.
At Daniel Wright 7, assuming that that site still exists in the future, when this episode comes out for you guys. I also have my own site, radfordwrites.com, for those of you who are listening to this podcast on Spotify or Google Podcasts or whatever. I also have all the episodes of the podcast listed there, as well as stories and now like blog articles where I do a lot of story analysis and stuff as well. All kinds of stuff, including links to my books. Go to my site. Not a request, just fucking do it.
Do it.
As always, John is a frequent collaborator of mine, both in most of these podcast episodes as well as whenever I need narration for anything, so you will undoubtedly see plenty of him in the future as well.
It's good to be back, everybody, and don't worry if it feels like you've been here before, because we're gonna do it all again.
Hey.